I'm Patrick McDermott.
And I'm Liam Parsons-Meyer.
And today we will be talking about supply, demand, and market equilibrium.
Okay, so let's start off with demand. Demand is a consumer's willingness and ability to pay for a certain good or service. It is important that the consumer is both willing and able to pay for a certain good or service. For example, you may be able to buy a new TV, however, you may not be willing to buy it since you may already have a new plasma screen TV. Now, you may be willing to buy a new Mercedes, but you may not be able to because you don't have the financial ability to purchase it.
The law of demand states that as the price of a good increases, the demand will decrease. Price level and demand are inversely related. If the price of iPhones goes up, the demand will decrease since the consumers will be less willing and able to buy them. The income effect states that an increase in real income will increase one's purchasing power, therefore increasing one's ability to buy a good or service. If Joe receives a raise at work, he will be able to buy more doors because of his newfound purchasing power. The substitution effect states that as price rises, consumers will replace more expensive goods with cheaper alternative goods. If the price of iPhones goes up, then the demand for Galaxies will go up as a substitute.
The law of diminishing marginal utility states that as a person increases the consumption of a single thing, then the marginal utility will decrease after each use of said unit. So after Jamal sees Mean Girls for the third time, he realizes that he didn't get the same feeling and satisfaction he did when he saw it the first time. So the demand curve shows a relationship between the price per unit of an item and the quantity demanded. It is downward sloping as to reflect the law of demand. The price level is on the y-axis while the quantity is on the x-axis. Movement along the demand curve reflects a change in quantity demanded, not a change in demand. A change in demand is represented by a shift in the entire demand curve. When referring to demand curve, we are talking about the inverse relationship between prices and quantity demanded. Quantity demanded refers to a particular amount offered for sale at a certain price, so it's a specific point.
The determinants of the demand curve are consumer income, prices of substitute goods, prices of complementary goods, consumer tastes and preferences, consumer expectations, and the number of buyers. Changes in consumer income will affect whether a consumer will buy a normal good or an inferior good. The demand for normal goods increase as consumer income increases, and the demand for inferior goods increases as consumer income decreases. When Jacob receives his Christmas bonus, he instantly goes to the refrigerator store to pick up the newest KitchenAid model. This is an example of how a change in income can change the demand for certain goods and services. When Jesus gets a pay cut, he is forced to buy a measly ice chest instead of purchasing a super chill fridge.
As the price of one good increases, the demand for another increases. This is an example of a substitute good. Substitute goods can replace one another if the conditions of one good is changed. For example, if the price of backpacks increase, Jeremiah may shamelessly buy a fanny pack because they are cheaper than the backpack. This would cause the demand for fanny packs to go up and the demand for backpacks to go down. On the other hand, the price of complementary goods will determine a different product's demand. If the movie Marley and Me goes on sale, then the demand for tissues will have to go up.
Another shifter of demand is consumer tastes and preferences. If Oprah airs an episode promoting yoga, consumers will become more interested in yoga and thus buy more yoga balls. This causes demand for yoga balls to increase because of a change in consumers' interests. Consumer expectations can change based off of income expectations and price expectations. If Jorge learns that he will get a promotion next month, he'll be more willing and able to buy a diamond-studded purse. This will cause the demand for diamond-studded purses to increase or shift to the right. This is an example of a change in consumers' income expectations. However, if diamond-studded purses are expected to go on sale at JCPenney in a month, then the demand will go down since Jorge will hold off on his purchases until the price drops. This causes the demand to shift to the left because of a current drop in demand. This is an example of a change in consumer price expectations. Because the market demand curve is the sum of the individual demand curves of all consumers in the market, if the market of consumers increases, then demand will rise and vice versa. Now we have some questions for you. Number 1, explain demand versus quantity demanded. Number 2, explain the law of demand. Number 3, how does the income effect work? Number 4, explain the substitution effect.
So now let's move on to supply. Supply is the relation between the price of a good and the quantity that producers are willing and able to sell during a given period. The law of supply, or the law of increasing marginal costs, states that the quantity supply is directly related with its price. For example, if throw pillows increase in price, suppliers will be both willing and able to produce more in a given time period. The supply curve shows the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied during a given time period. So the supply curve is upward sloping because price and quantity are directly related, as stated by the law of supply. Supply is shown throughout the whole supply curve, while quantity supplied is shown as a single point on the supply curve. Quantity supplied is a particular amount offered for sale at a certain price.
There are 6 determinants of supply. They are cost of inputs, technology and productivity, taxes or subsidies, producer expectations, price of related goods, and the number of sellers. If relevant resources for a good or service increase in price, then suppliers are forced to pay more for the production of said goods. This would then cause the supply to decrease and result in a supply curve shift to the left. If the cost of plastic increases, then the production cost of soda bottles will also increase.
New taxes decrease the purchasing power of a firm, so they will be able to afford fewer resources, causing a fall in production. A subsidy is money awarded to firms by the government, hopefully to increase the productivity of that firm. The government may give lumps of money to farmers with the hope of increasing goods supplied by them. Expectations of high prices may encourage producers to supply more goods and services to the general public. However, this can also make producers reduce their current supply if the good can be easily stored. So for example, an oil company may conserve their oil reserves because it's easily stored if prices are expected to increase in the future, thus driving the prices up even more.
If the price of an alternative good is lower than the price of a main good, producers may increase their supply of the alternative good and produce less of the main good. If the prices of Pepsi fall in comparison to Coke, then the demand for Pepsi will rise and the demand for Coke will fall. Pepsi will want to produce more because of its increasing demand for their product.
So now we have some more questions on the supply. So, number 1, describe the law of supply. Number 2, what is the difference between quantity supplied and the supply? Number 3, what are the 6 determinants of supply?
Market supply is the total amount supplied by all producers, so if there are more producers, supply will increase as well. If the amount of koi breeders increases, then the market supply for koi will also increase.
Market equilibrium is where the supply and the demand in a market are equal. Consumers and producers both benefit from market equilibrium since the market exerts no pressure to change the price or quantity, thus the market is stable.
A shortage is when the amount by which quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. This forces the prices to rise. A surplus is when the amount by which quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded.
this forces the prices down.
A change in demand is shown as a shift on the demand curve caused by one of the determinants. The demand curve will decrease if it shifts to the left, and it will increase if the demand curve shifts to the right. A change in supply is shown as a shift on the supply curve caused by one of the determinants of supply. A shift upwards on the curve shows an increase, while a shift downwards on the curve shows a decrease. So now we have some questions for you. Number 1, if consumer income increases, what direction would the demand curve shift? Number 2, say that chandeliers are substitute goods for lamps. If lamp prices increases, what way would the demand curve for chandeliers shift? Number 3, how would the demand curve for geckos change if the price went up?
Now we have some more questions on the change of supply. Number 1, how will the supply curve of pizza be affected if the price for tomatoes goes up? Number 2, what will happen to the supply for Macs if PC prices are lowered? And number 3, if bakers go on strike, what will happen to the supply curve of bread?